His name was Chaos, and it was a name earned in sweat and fear. He was a creature of dust and thunder, a 2,000-pound storm of muscle and instinct, trapped within the fading promise of wooden fences. On the open range, such a spirit might be called majestic. Here, on the Double Creek Ranch, hemmed in by the quiet anxieties of a family farm, he was just dangerous. His eyes, the color of burnt amber, held a wildness that wasn't just animal. It felt personal, a deep and inconsolable rage against the world of men. He had shattered a reinforced gate, gored the tire of a tractor that strayed too close, and sent seasoned ranch hands scrambling over railings with the desperate agility of frightened squirrels. His bellows were not the low, rumbling calls of his kind, but sharp, explosive roars of pure fury that seemed to tear the very fabric of the peaceful valley air. Every expert, from the seasoned local vet to a high-priced animal behaviorist from the city, had delivered the same grim verdict. It wasn't aggression born of territoriality or dominance. It was something broken, something unfixable. He was, they said, a neurological misfire, a walking tragedy. And so the final, heavy decision had fallen on David's shoulders. David, a man whose hands were calloused from fixing what was broken, fences, pumps, and hearts, was now faced with a problem that offered no solution but a final, terrible mercy. The rifle felt cold and unnaturally heavy in his hands that morning, a tool of endings, not beginnings. The air was still and sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the metallic tang of inevitability. The other men stood back, their faces grim, their usual easy banter replaced by a shared, respectful silence. This was not a hunt. It was an execution, a necessary failure. They had cornered Chaos in the small, sturdy enclosure built for just this purpose. The bull paced, his massive head low, white foam flecking his lips. Each thunderous hoof-fall sent tremors through the ground, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed the pounding in David's own chest. He raised the rifle, the wooden stock pressing into his shoulder, and centered the scope on the space just behind the bull's ear. It was the quickest, most humane way. A final kindness for a life defined by uncontrollable rage. He let out a slow breath, his finger tightening on the trigger, the world narrowing to that single, devastating point of contact. The click of the safety being disengaged was deafening in the silence. And in that razor-thin moment between decision and action, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. A small shape, slipping through the very fence the men had used to contain the beast. A gasp went through the small crowd. It was his daughter, Maya. She was 10 years old, a girl who lived in a world of her own making, a world that was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more sensitive than the one the rest of them inhabited. Maya was autistic. Words were often difficult for her, tangled things that rarely captured the symphony of sensations she experienced. The world, for Maya, was a constant barrage of noise and light, a chaotic opera of textures and temperatures that could easily overwhelm her. The scratchy tag on a t-shirt could feel like sandpaper against her skin. The hum of a refrigerator could sound like a roaring engine. The casual chatter of the dinner table could become a deafening wall of sound. To cope, she had built a sanctuary of silence and order around herself. She found peace in patterns, in the way sunlight filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree, in the meticulous arrangement of her small collection of smooth river stones, and most of all, in the quiet, non-judgmental company of animals. She would spend hours watching the barn swallows dart and weave, memorizing their flight paths. She knew the unique, soft nicker of each horse in the stable. While others saw livestock, tools, and commodities, Maya saw beings with their own silent languages, their own profound emotions. And for weeks, she had been watching Chaos. From the safety of her bedroom window, through a pair of old binoculars, she had studied him. The men saw a monster. David saw a liability. The experts saw a lost cause. But Maya saw something else. She saw the way his muscles tensed not with aggression, but with fear, whenever the noisy feed truck rumbled past. She saw the frantic way his eyes darted back and forth, not looking for a fight, but for an escape from a world that was too loud, too bright, too fast. She saw his rage not as an attack, but as a desperate, terrified scream into a void that would not listen. In his violent outbursts, she recognized a mirror of her own sensory meltdowns, that feeling of being so utterly overwhelmed that the only recourse was to push the world away with all her might. She didn't see chaos. She saw a kindred spirit, drowning in a sea of sensation, just like her. And on this final, terrible morning, she had felt the shift. The quiet dread that had settled over the ranch was not an abstract feeling for her. It was a physical presence, a low, oppressive hum that vibrated in her bones and made the air feel thick and heavy in her lungs. She knew what the cold finality in her father's voice meant. She knew what the heavy silence of the men signified. And she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and reason, that she was the only one who could answer the bull's silent scream. The morning had dawned in shades of gray and resignation. David had moved through his pre-dawn rituals with a mechanical numbness, the familiar comfort of strong coffee, and the scent of hay doing little to ease the knot in his stomach. He had looked in on Maya, sleeping soundly, her face a mask of tranquility, and felt a pang of guilt. This ranch, this life he was trying to build for her, was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of peace. Today, it felt like a place of violence. He was breaking the unspoken promise he'd made to her, to protect all living things within its borders. The vet, a kind but pragmatic man named Thomas, arrived just as the sun was beginning to cast a weak, watery light over the fields. His truck door closed with a soft, final thud. There were no pleasantries, only a shared nod of understanding. This was the part of the job they both hated, the part that left a stain on the soul. As they walked toward the pen, David could feel the weight of every step. He was a creator, a nurturer. He brought life into this world, mended what was broken. Taking a life, even a life deemed too broken to save, felt like a betrayal of his very essence. Chaos was already agitated, his hot breath steaming in the cool morning air. The presence of the men, the low hum of their nervous energy, was like gasoline on the fire of his anxiety. He began his frantic pacing, his massive body a testament to the power that was about to be extinguished. Inside the house, Maya was awake. She didn't need to hear the words or see the rifle to understand. The emotional frequency of the ranch had changed. The usual morning rhythm, the clanking of the milking equipment, the soft lowing of the cows, the distant crow of the rooster, was overlaid with a discordant hum of dread. It was a frequency she was exquisitely tuned to. It coiled in her stomach and made her skin prickle. While her mother was distracted by a phone call in the kitchen, her voice low and worried, Maya slipped on her worn rubber boots. There was no plan, no conscious thought of defiance. There was only a deep, instinctual pull, a magnetic force drawing her toward the epicenter of the ranch's pain. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, a ghost in her own home. She slipped out the back door, the cold air a shock against her cheeks, and began to walk, not towards the men, but towards the bull. Maya, no! David's voice was a choked, ragged sound, a blend of terror and disbelief. The world, which had narrowed to the bull and the crosshairs, suddenly exploded outward. His daughter, his fragile, precious daughter, was inside the pen. She was walking slowly, deliberately, toward the 2,000-pound embodiment of uncontrollable rage. The other men froze, their hands half raised as if to ward off the impossible sight. Someone swore under their breath. Thomas, the vet, took a step forward, then stopped, understanding that any sudden movement could trigger the very catastrophe they were all witnessing. The bull, Chaos, stopped pacing. His massive head swung around, his wild amber eyes fixing on the small, approaching figure. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest. His body tensed, the great muscles of his shoulders coiling like immense springs. This was the moment before the strike, the terrible stillness before the explosion. Every instinct screamed at David to run, to tackle his daughter, to drag her out of harm's way. But he was paralyzed. He was paralyzed by the look on Maya's face. It was not a look of fear. It was not the vacant, distant look she sometimes wore when the world became too much. It was a look of serene, absolute focus. Her eyes were locked on the bull's, and in them was a profound and gentle understanding that seemed to transcend the space between them. She didn't falter. She didn't hesitate. She continued her slow, rhythmic walk, her small, worn boots making soft impressions in the damp earth. It was as if she and the bull were the only two beings in the universe, caught in a silent, sacred conversation that no one else could hear. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in David's hands now, a useless, profane object in the face of this unbelievable scene. The world seemed to slow down, the frantic pounding of his heart the only sound he could hear. He watched his daughter, a wisp of a girl in a world of giants, walk toward the monster he was about to kill, and for the first time, he saw that she wasn't walking into danger. She was walking into her purpose. Time seemed to bend and stretch, each second elongating into an eternity. The air was thick with unspoken fear, a collective breath held in the lungs of every man present. Chaos stood his ground, a mountain of trembling muscle, his breath coming in hot, white puffs. His flared nostrils twitched, sampling the air, sampling the scent of the small, fearless creature approaching him. He lowered his massive head, the tips of his formidable horns glinting in the morning light, aimed directly at her small frame. It was a posture of imminent attack. But Maya didn't stop. She raised her hand, not in a gesture of defense, but of offering. Her fingers were small, her palms soft and pink. She reached forward, her movements slow and fluid, into the space where no one dared to go. She reached for his face. She reached for the soft, velvety patch of his nose, an area of exquisite sensitivity. A collective, silent scream went through the onlookers. David's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic prisoner. This was it, the final, tragic moment. And then, her fingertips made contact. It was a touch so light, so impossibly gentle, it seemed to carry no weight at all. Just the barest whisper of skin against skin. In that instant, something broke. Not a bone, not a life, but the spell of rage that had held the great bull captive. A tremor ran through Chaos's enormous body, a deep, shuddering wave that started at the tip of his nose and rolled through him like a seismic event. He did not charge. He did not roar. He let out a long, slow sigh, a sound so full of release and sorrow, and a strange, deep-seated peace that it seemed to pull all the tension out of the air with it. His eyes, once blazing with panic, softened. The wild, frantic fire was gone, replaced by a deep, liquid pool of something that looked shockingly like recognition. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into her touch with a trust so absolute it was heartbreaking. He was no longer Chaos, the monster. He was just a living creature, weary and frightened, who had finally been heard. Maya kept her hand there, her fingers gently stroking his nose. She began to hum, a low, melodic, wordless tune that was uniquely hers. It was the sound she made when she was calm, when she was arranging her stones, when she felt safe. And the bull, this beast that had terrorized them all, stood perfectly still, his head bowed, listening. The rifle in David's hands dropped a few inches, his arms suddenly weak. The world rushed back in, the sounds of birds, the distant hum of the highway, but everything was different. The very laws of nature as he knew them had just been rewritten in front of his eyes by his silent, 10-year-old daughter. For a long moment, no one moved. The scene was a frozen tableau. The stunned men, the lowered rifle, the girl, and the gentle giant. Then, as if waking from a trance, David started forward, his parental instinct finally overpowering his astonishment. "Maya," he breathed, his voice hoarse. He reached the fence and fumbled with the latch, his only thought to snatch his daughter from the mesmerizing spell she was under. But as he stepped into the pen, the bull, Chaos, shifted his immense weight. He didn't move aggressively. Instead, he took a half step, placing his body partially between Maya and her father. A low rumble, completely different from his earlier roars of rage, vibrated from his chest. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. A clear, unmistakable signal of protection. Maya didn't flinch. She simply gave the bull's nose one last, soft pat and turned to her father, her eyes clear and calm. David scooped her into his arms, his heart still a wild drum against his ribs. He half expected the bull to charge, to protest the separation. But Chaos only watched, his gaze soft and fixed on the girl. He had not broken eye contact with her. "One more day," David heard himself say to Thomas, who was staring at the bull with an expression of profound, scientific bewilderment. "We give him one more day." It was an illogical, emotional decision, born from the miracle he had just witnessed, but no one argued. The men dispersed slowly, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief, casting backward glances as if to make sure what they had seen was real. That afternoon, David reinforced the pen, not out of fear, but out of a new, bewildering sense of responsibility. The fence, once a barrier to contain a monster, now felt like something different. It was a line between two worlds, the loud, logical, predictable world he had always known, and the quiet, intuitive, impossible world his daughter inhabited. A world where a gentle touch could disarm a beast. His skepticism warred with the undeniable evidence of his own eyes. Was it a fluke? A moment of strange animal behavior that meant nothing? Or had he, for all these years, been fundamentally misunderstanding not only the bull, but his own child? He watched from the kitchen window as Maya sat just outside the enclosure, on a small wooden stool, her book of patterns open on her lap. And inside the pen, Chaos lay down, his massive body aligned with hers, separated only by the wooden rails. He was not pacing, he was not agitated, he was at rest, his gaze fixed on the small girl who had, somehow, spoken his language. The fence between them seemed to shrink, no longer a barrier of containment, but a fragile, porous boundary between two souls who had found each other across an impossible divide. A new routine, as quiet and gentle as Maya herself, began to settle over the Double Creek Ranch. The name Chaos, with its echoes of fear and violence, faded from use. To Maya, he had no name, or perhaps a name that couldn't be spoken in words. He was simply a presence, a stillness, a kindred spirit. For the sake of conversation, the family began to call him Stillwater, a name that felt more like a description than a label. Each day, Maya would spend hours with him. She would sit just outside his pen, reading her books aloud, in a soft, halting whisper, her voice gaining a strange new confidence when he was her only audience. She would hum her calming melodies, and from within the pen, Stillwater would answer with a low, contented rumble. She brought him offerings, a handful of the sweetest clover from the far pasture, a perfectly ripe apple she polished on her shirt. She communicated not through commands or training, but through presence. She taught him peace simply by being peaceful. Through her, David began to see. He started to notice the things Maya had always seen. He saw how Stillwater would flinch and press himself into the far corner of the pen whenever the loud, backfiring farm truck passed by. He noticed how the bull's breathing would grow ragged and shallow when unfamiliar visitors spoke in loud voices near his enclosure. The bull's unprovoked rage was not unprovoked at all. It was a reaction. A massive, terrified, sensory-driven reaction to a world that was too much. A world of sudden noises, sharp movements, and unpredictable energies. A world, David realized with a jolt that shook him to his core, that must have felt very much like the world his daughter often struggled to navigate. He made a call to Maya's therapist, Dr. Aris, a woman with a calm voice and an open mind. He described the incident, the touch, the transformation, feeling foolish as the words came out. He expected skepticism, a gentle dismissal. Instead, there was a thoughtful silence on the other end of the line. "David," she said finally, "some theories suggest that certain animals, especially prey animals, are incredibly sensitive to human nervous systems. They react to our heart rate, our adrenaline, our anxiety. Chaos, as you called him, was likely living in a state of perpetual fight or flight, and everyone around him reflected that fear back at him amplifying it. She paused. Maya doesn't have that. Her internal state, especially when she's calm, is incredibly regulated, incredibly peaceful. She approached him not with fear, but with pure, non-judgmental empathy. She didn't try to dominate him or control him. She simply offered him a state of being that he could co-regulate with. She offered him sanctuary. David hung up the phone, the simple word echoing in his mind. Sanctuary. Maya wasn't just calming a bull. She was creating a safe harbor for a creature who had been lost at sea. And in doing so, she was teaching her father a new language, a language of quiet observation, of empathy, of listening to the emotions beneath the noise. The fragile peace was put to the test 3 weeks later. A fierce, unseasonable thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, a violent squall of lightning and percussive thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. Storms were always a difficult time for Maya. The flashes of light, the bone-rattling cracks of thunder, the frantic drumming of rain on the roof, it was a sensory assault that often sent her into a state of shutdown. Curled into a ball in the darkest corner of her closet, hands pressed over her ears. As the storm hit its peak, a deafening crash of thunder echoed through the valley, followed by the sharp, splintering sound of wood. David's heart leaped into his throat. A massive oak branch, ancient and heavy, had been sheared off by a lightning strike and had fallen directly onto the fence of Stillwater's pen, shattering 2 of the main rails. The pen was open, and Stillwater was out. Panic seized David. The old fears, the image of the raging bull came flooding back. He yelled for his wife to stay inside with Maya and grabbed the heaviest maglite he could find, his mind racing. Where would the bull go? Would his old panic return in the chaos of the storm? He burst out the door into the driving rain, shouting the bull's name, his voice swallowed by the wind. He scanned the fields with the beam of his flashlight, expecting to see a dark shape rampaging through the terrified herd of cows. He saw nothing. A new, colder fear began to creep in. Where was Maya? He spun around and saw that the back door was slightly ajar. He sprinted back to the house, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure dread. He found her not in her closet, but on the covered back porch. She was sitting on the top step, her knees drawn to her chest, trembling. The flashes of lightning illuminated her pale, terrified face, and there, standing in front of her, was Stillwater. He wasn't rampaging, he wasn't wild. He was a silent, immovable wall of solid muscle, positioned squarely between Maya and the raging storm. His massive body blocked the driving rain and the disorienting flashes of light. Every time a clap of thunder shook the earth, he would let out a low, soft rumble, a sound that seemed to absorb the violence of the storm and offer a steady, calming counter-frequency. He was shielding her, protecting her. Have you ever seen something with your own eyes that made you question everything you thought you knew? In that moment, David didn't see a bull or a girl. He saw a guardian and his charge. He watched as Maya, sensing his presence, uncurled slightly and reached out a trembling hand, resting it on the bull's powerful, rain-slicked shoulder. The bull's low rumble softened even more, a tangible vibration of comfort. David lowered his flashlight, the beam falling to the ground. The monster he had feared was gone forever. In its place stood his daughter's truest friend, her most steadfast protector. The fence was broken, but a new, unbreakable bond had been forged in its place. The storm passed, leaving behind the clean, earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and a profound quiet that settled deep into the heart of the ranch. The incident with the broken fence became a turning point, a final, irrefutable piece of evidence that shattered the last of David's skepticism. He repaired the fence the next day, but it felt like a formality. The real enclosure was the invisible circle of trust that now surrounded Maya and Stillwater. It was a bond that began to radiate outward, changing everything it touched. The change in Maya was the most remarkable of all. The girl who had lived in a world of guarded silence began to emerge. The bull became her anchor in the stormy sea of sensory input. When she felt overwhelmed, she would seek him out, resting her forehead against his massive, warm flank, and his steady, slow breathing would regulate her own. His calm was a transferable gift. Grounded by his presence, she found the courage to engage more with the world around her. Her first spoken word in months was not mama or dada. It was a soft, whispered, still, uttered one afternoon as she fed him an apple. The word was a key, unlocking a door that had been sealed for too long. Soon, she was speaking in short, quiet phrases, first to the bull, then to her parents. She started helping her mother in the garden, her small hands gentle with the new seedlings. She even began to tolerate the noise of the dinner table, anchored by the knowledge that her quiet giant was resting peacefully in the nearby field. She was healing, and he was her healer. But the healing was mutual. Stillwater, the bull who was once a vessel of fear and anxiety, had become the serene center of the ranch. The other animals seemed to sense it. The horses were calmer in the pasture they now sometimes shared with him. The dogs no longer barked nervously when he was near. His presence had a tranquilizing effect on the entire ecosystem of the farm. He was no longer a redeemed villain. He was a source of profound peace. David would often find himself just watching them, this unlikely pair. He saw how Maya would sometimes stand before the bull, looking at her own faint reflection in his large, dark eye, as if gazing into a mirror that showed her not her fragile exterior, but the quiet strength she possessed within. An emotional inversion had taken place on his ranch. The greatest source of his fear had become the source of his family's greatest peace. The creature he had almost destroyed had, in turn, saved a part of his daughter he feared he had lost forever. The deepest wounds, he was learning, were not always healed by logic and force, but by the quiet, unassuming power of a kindred spirit. The story of the girl and the bull began to ripple outward from the Double Creek Ranch, carried on the winds of local gossip and quiet wonder. At first, it was a story told in hushed tones at the feed store, a piece of rural folklore. The crazy bull that had been tamed by the special little girl. But those who came to see for themselves, drawn by curiosity, left with something much deeper. They didn't find a spectacle. There was no trick, no performance. What they found was a profound and simple truth, playing out in the quiet pasture. They saw a massive bull resting peacefully, his head often in the lap of a small girl who would be meticulously arranging leaves and twigs into intricate patterns on his back. They saw a nonverbal child who spoke a language of touch and presence that was more eloquent than any words. They saw a connection that defied explanation but was impossible to deny. The ranch itself transformed. David started a small, informal program, inviting other families with children on the autism spectrum to visit. He made no grand claims, offered no promises of miracles. He simply offered a quiet space for them to come and sit, to watch Maya and Stillwater, to exist in the peaceful atmosphere the pair had created. Some children, who were often agitated and overwhelmed, would grow visibly calm in the bull's presence. Some parents, weary from years of struggle, would watch with tears in their eyes, witnessing a connection they had only dreamed of for their own children. The broken fence had become a gateway. The story was no longer just about a girl and a bull. It was about the power of empathy to bridge the gap between different worlds. It was a modern parable about listening beyond words, about seeing beyond labels. It was a testament to the fact that our greatest strengths can sometimes be found in what the world perceives as our greatest weaknesses. The sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of soft pink and warm gold, a color palette of peace. David watched from the porch as Maya leaned against Stillwater's side, her head resting on his powerful shoulder. The bull stood over her, a silent, devoted guardian, his dark form silhouetted against the dying light. The fences of the ranch no longer looked like enclosures, but like gentle suggestions, lines drawn on a landscape of limitless possibility. The story of chaos and Maya wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. It was a quiet, enduring promise that in a world full of noise, the most powerful communication is often silent. It is the language of the heart, a language that can calm the wildest storms, both outside and within.